Hey, this is Eric Johnson, 50-year-old guy, been rocking back and forth since I was 2. So I want to recap and get back into a little bit of storytelling about how I grew up with music, and maybe you can relate to any of these bands. Leave a comment. Anything you can relate to, leave a comment, because I really find it fascinating that there's people out there just like me, and it's really cool to connect on here. So I want to start with the jock friends that I had, and what we were listening to. So I was in the graduating class of 1990. I didn't graduate high school. I dropped out the end of my junior year, and I'll get into that maybe. But just trying to give you a time frame. So my jock friends, there was let's see, there was 2 bands that we really listened to, and we used to drive around in this old beat up Impala car, and 2 of the albums that really stood out that were just blowing our minds, we'd never heard anything like it, was Guns N' Roses, their very first, Appetite for Destruction. I mean, we were just blown away by that. We were always listening to that. And Metallica. So go back a little bit, we were into Eazy-E and NWA, and we were driving around thinking we were badass in this small town of 8,000 people with absolutely no black people at all, and thinking that we were tough, right? And it was just funny how naive and insulated we were to the real world. And looking back, I loved how innocent that town was. It was just a Victorian town, a little seaport town in Washington. The town was Port Townsend, and I grew up there most of my life, 30 years. And so we just drive around listening to music. Then I want to talk about so my friends and I turned them on to alternative rock, at least a couple of friends, and I turned them on to Jane's Addiction. And we went to the very first Lollapalooza. It was in Enumclaw, and the headliner was Jane's Addiction, and Susie and the Banshees were there, Henry Rollins, Butthole Surfers, even I think it was Ice Cube. And then another, I forgot the other band, but it was an amazing lineup. And I remember Henry Rollins coming out, and his shirt was off, and he's just tattooed up, and just pure muscle. The guy is the most intense person in the world. I mean, he's just pure anger, and it's just like, wow, this guy is insane, never seen anything like it. And towards the evening, Jane's Addiction came on, and their set was very elegant. It was like red velvety type feel, just, it's hard, kind of like erotic, it was very erotic and Spanish feeling, because they were touring for a Ritual de lo Habitual, and if you've seen the cover of that album, it's very sexual. And so it's getting dark. I've never been to a concert before, and we move towards the front, and Jane's Addiction is playing, and it's melodic. It's just mind blowing. It's mystical. I'm not on any drugs. I mean, I'm just this innocent guy who wasn't even really experimenting that hard yet, and so I went straight, but. So all of a sudden, like, it rained a little bit, and then people in the front were starting to kind of mosh a little, as much as you can, to Jane's Addiction. And I remember that all those hot bodies together created this steam. The steam was it just started billowing up, and it was spiraling around, and it was just perfect, fitting along with that melodic tribal sound of Jane's Addiction. It just really changed my life. I was like, there's another world out here. And it was right on it was right when my dad kicked me out of the house, and I was experimenting a little with, you know, and so my world was changing rapidly because my parents were so straight and strict that when I finally got let out of the house, I started experimenting, saw Jane's Addiction, I was living on friends' floors, you know, literally homeless, and listening to all these bands, and my new skater friends were turning me on to punk, and then there was Depeche Mode and The Cure, Butthole Surfers, and just you know, I can go on, just all these different styles blending together. Oh, and Nine Inch Nails came out with their first album, Pretty Hate Machine, so I was starting to get into that industrial thing. I think the Buzzcocks were industrial, and Skinny Puppy, I think. So just a huge, and then the whole town, it seemed like, okay, so some drug dealer came into town and dispersed a bunch of the, you know, the paper stuff, you know, and it seemed like all my punk friends were on it. And I remember before my parents kicked me out, I was listening to King Diamond, and I had a friend over, and I was like, listen to this, and I had my headphones, and I gave him the headphones, and he was a preppy guy, and he actually was open to taking some, and so I put on Them by King Diamond, and the intro is all this, it's like a haunted movie music, and he was like, and he like threw the headphones down, and he's just like, you know, we're just tripping in my parents' house. So I was starting to experiment a little before my dad kicked me out. But the whole town seemed to be impaired. And the craziest thing was, my friend and I walked out of the house, and I was like, let's watch the stars from my truck. My dad gave me his pickup truck. It was a hand-me-down. And we were laying in the back of the pickup and looking up at the stars. And all of a sudden we heard this car just barreling up the hill. You know, we were about, I don't know, 500 feet away from the street that went uptown. Okay, so it's this hill, and it's by this football field, and the hill goes up to uptown. And this two cars just went flying up that hill. And, you know, that's not normal for the small town. And we're high. And so I'm just like, wow, what was that? I mean, never seen anything like it. Turns out, I found out the next day that it was another friend of mine who dropped, same batch, and he flipped off some jocks in another car. So they were literally going through town, high-speed chase, like literally 80 miles an hour in a 20, just going around town in a wild frickin' car chase. I mean, talk about scary. I mean, when you drop, everything is 100 times more intense. So I bet they were thinking they were so panicked that my friend rammed into the other car just to try to stop them from chasing them. So while that crazy car chase is going on, my friend and I are looking at the stars, and it's all peaceful and loving, and I'm just like, wow, this world is so amazing. And my dad was mean to me, and I hadn't talked to him for 2 years. So there's all these different perceptions, realities going on. You got the crazy car chase going on, which is like pure nightmare for those guys. Then I'm hanging out in Galaxy Land, you know, thinking about my whole life ahead of me. I'm only 18, 19. My whole life is ahead of me. I'm optimistic. I'm thinking about just anything is possible at that age. And then I'm thinking about the reality I'm leaving behind. My dad being suppressive. But I loved my parents. and they loved me. They just didn't know how to parent me. And, you know, I was highly sensitive and bullheaded. My dad was bullheaded. We clashed. So at that moment was the beginning of my life. And I had a great childhood. Cute little town. Used to go swing in the park. Could walk from one end of the street to, or one side of the town to the other and not be harmed or harassed, or there was no gangs. There wasn't meth or any crazy crap like that. It was just a little bit of weed and a little bit of this once in a while. So yeah, the Lollapalooza was amazing. It was the very first Lollapalooza that they created. And from then on, life got more intense. And then all of a sudden I landed back into reality, and I was a dishwasher in a restaurant, and was living in a van for 2 years, just trying to park in between houses so they wouldn't kick me out. And I was writing poetry. Life was very simple, but I was just a dishwasher. Those big dreams kind of seemed a little subdued. And I wrote about 20 poems, and I crafted them perfectly. Just every word had to be perfect. And it was abstract. And I was working with this older lady. She was 20 years older than me. We were working together at a restaurant called Sea Galley, and I think it became a chain, but that was the very first Sea Galley. It was on a pier, so we lived by the water, and I was a dishwasher, and this woman was a line cook. And she had these flames on her arms, tattoos, and I've never seen a girl with tattoos. This is way before everyone got them. And I was just like, wow, she's so different. And I found out that she was pretty well read, because she'd take these breaks, these cigarette breaks, and she'd always be reading. And I was like, hey, would you like to read some of my poetry? And she's like, sure, I'll take it home. And it was in a nice green binder, and she read them, and she came back the next day, and she was like, I'm really impressed. You have deep insight for how young you are. And she's like, would you like to come over for some wine sometime? And I was like, sure, okay. And she had 4 children, and 2 of them were older than me. I mean, she had children when she was like 14, 15, something like that. So I went over to her house, and I'm like, wow, what am I doing here? I mean, like, a guy my age, it was his mom. And so I'm like, okay, this is kind of weird. And so I was like drinking wine with her, and she was like, would you like to stay the night? And I was just like, I never had a girlfriend. I had like a 2-week fling in high school, and it was pathetic. So I'm like, really? Okay, yeah. And so I pretended I left, because one of her sons was living there, and he was in the other room. So I slammed the door like I left, and then I ran into her room, and we made love, and I'd never gone all the way before. So I was like, wow, this is crazy. So now I'm dating this woman who's 40, I'm 20. I'm not living in the van anymore. That broke down in my friend's yard. And all of a sudden, she's turning me on to wine and fine food and literature. And I'm drinking red wine every night. So now I'm getting drunk 5 nights a week. I have a lot of anxiety in the morning. I have a lot of angst. I'm an angry young man. Mostly because I wasn't speaking to my parents, and they literally lived 2 blocks down the road. They didn't know where I was. I told them to F off, and I was gone. But little did they know, I was living in a studio downtown, only about 3 blocks over. They never saw me. So I had a lot of anger, hungover, getting drunk at night, and I was playing drums, riding my Schwinn Cruiser around town, super skinny, and that lasted for 4.5 years. And then I was starting to become mean, and she kicked me out. I was homeless again, and then I went into Job Corps, and I learned how to work on tugboats, and this was on the Columbia River in Astoria, Oregon, and it was kind of military style. I got in shape. I was sober. I went to AA. They had AA there, and then they had this sweat lodge retreat, and it was inside a teepee. And I went there, and there was real Indians there performing, Cherokees, and they had these hot rocks in the middle of the teepee. So it got really hot in there, and they sprinkled sage on the rocks, and someone broke down crying and by me. And they're just like, if it gets too hot, just cup your mouth to the earth. That's where it's the coolest. And it got so hot in there. And so here I am. I went from dropping this 2 years earlier to being in a sweat lodge with Indians. And life is just a trip, guys. You know that. And today it seems so dull in comparison. I'm just sitting in this dark room. I'm just sitting in this room, rocking all day, listening to music, going down memory lane, and trying to get high off of nostalgia. It's a cheap high, thinking about the past, listening to old songs that trigger that past memory. And that's why I'm connecting with you guys. Sorry if I'm rambling or talking about myself, but hey, I have autism. I'm self-centered. I think about myself all day long. I think about others 10% of the time. I'm trying to be more emphatic or empathetic, however you pronounce that, and compassionate. Learning about the past trauma I had, reading books about CPTSD and addiction and whatnot. So if you want to connect and keep watching these, please subscribe. Leave a comment if any of this relates to you. I was born in 1972 in Newport Beach, California. I might do another one about how I grew up around alcohol. And so stay tuned for that. Love you guys. God bless.